Hello art stars. Today we're going to look at Surrealism and Surrealist art. Surrealism is where an artist takes an image, picture, or a series of images and puts them in different contexts using different juxtapositions, poses, playing with scale. So if you could have a look if you could pause me and have a look at the work of an artist called Salvador Dali, that's Salvador Dali, Salvador Dali, who was a Surrealist artist. You will see some really good examples from looking at his work. So, for example, you'd have lots of melting clocks on his work, or a phone with a huge lobster on top. So it's images or pictures in places that we don't imagine to see them. And Surrealist artists work in lots of different ways. They use film, collage, paint, just drawing with pencil, all kinds of different mediums. So I'll go over that in a little bit, what materials you can use for your picture. But it's about putting things where we don't expect to see them. So a few examples would be if I were to draw a giant fish walking down the street, or a tiny little elephant and an enormous mouse standing next to it, almost like a dreamlike sequence or event. So things where we don't expect to see them, where we've played with scale or proportion, put things in a different context to where we'd expect them to be. This is what we call surreal, very surreal. I've got a few examples of my own personal artwork to show you, which would be categorized as being quite surreal. And then I've got a couple of little experiments and mark-making activities for us to do together. And then you're going to go off and develop those into your own artwork. So I've just going to show you these two artworks of mine. These are quite old. So this one would class as being quite surreal. So this is done. This picture of a lady is done. It's using collage, so stuck on pieces of paper, gesso or white acrylic paint you can use, and building up layers of colour. So I'd stick different pictures down, so you can see we've got these little flowers on her dress, and then I've painted over them with white acrylics, and then I've gone over the top with oil pastels, and I've put different imagery on there. So this is quite surreal because the picture's quite 2D, she looks quite flat, but also there's an enormous cockerel just floating on her dress there, but slightly coming off the dress as well. So it's a separate part of the picture. And for this one, I was inspired from the 1940s and posters from the time showing women going out to work and working on the farms and in industry. So this would be an example of something which is quite surreal. It's not aiming to be realistic. Things are out of context. And there's so many different ways in which it could have been done. You know, it could have been a giant cockerel. My person could have been tiny, standing next to the cockerel. There's just so many different possibilities. So that I would class as being quite surreal. And just something a bit simpler as well. This little one is quite a surreal picture because it's a duck riding a bike, and that's not something that's obviously not something that's real that we expect to see. It's quite a surreal image. A bit like if you imagine going inside of a dream, the things that you'd see in there. So the sky falling down, or trees which reach into the sky, or trees that go underground. There's no limit really to how imaginative you can be with this, or how you want to put things. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a little experiment now with our materials, and just see what lines and shapes we can create. And the reason we're going to do this is firstly to free up your creativity, because often when we tell ourselves, right, I'm going to draw a tiny elephant and a huge mouse, for example, we can overthink it and start rubbing it out and making changes, and we don't always get our most creative results. Whereas if we just give some time to experimenting and drawing, with our materials with no set outcome in mind. This is where we can see things that we just wouldn't have thought to have done otherwise. So material-wise, it's up to you what you use today. I'm going to use some watercolour paints, and I'm going to use my pencil. Oil pastels work well too, if you want to use oil pastels as well, and you can use your oil pastels with your paints. If you want to use thicker paints like acrylics or poster paint, that's absolutely fine. You can do that. Even if you want to use a bit of collage and cut out some old pictures and stick them down, that is fine as well. We're just going to have a play first of all. So I'm going to move my camera now so you can see. There we go. Let's move this out of the way. Okay, so we're going to start off by making some marks on our paper. So here's one I've just made earlier. So this is just an experimental piece, if you've got any scraps of paper. And what I want you to do is just remembering what we've learned over the last few weeks, techniques and processes we've learned, and also just make up some marks of your own. So for example, if you were here on the first session, we looked at shading and toning. So we could start really, really light, and we could shade in, and it could gradually get darker and darker, like this. We could try some lines like this. I could shade in a large area. And I'm just trying to give you some ideas here, so you're welcome to copy the ones I do, but I'd love it if you came up with some of your own as well. And like I say, this will make us more creative in our thinking. It will get rid of any barriers or blocks to our creativity. It should help with resolving those, but also it will inspire us because we'll think, oh, this is really nice texture or shape. I can use this in my drawing somehow. So I've done some light lines. We could do some blending on top, and then do some dark shapes on top of that, a bit like leopard prints. I really like this, actually, that effect. I might reuse that. Try my pencil on the side. What marks can I get when my pencil's on the side? I'm pressing down quite hard there. What if I do it really lightly? And then what about those lines in between the shapes I've made? What if I fill those in with pattern or detail? And if you're using pastels, if you're using oil pastels, you could try peeling the paper off the side and rubbing those down, seeing what different materials and what different marks and textures you can make from those. I'm going to try starting with a dark line, and I'm gradually going to go lighter and lighter as I go down. So start dark and gradually taking more and more pressure off until I gradually go into nothing. So starting dark, going into light like that, and then I might try doing the same across, so going dark into light, dark, lighter, 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 dark, lighter, lighter, lighter. That's quite an interesting grid or shape there. And you might then, when you're doing this, you start to see things that you think, oh, I could use this for something. Like now, just one of the images that's come into my head would be of drawing an animal. It could be anything, something you wouldn't expect to see it on, like an elephant, or yeah, anything, a fish. And then I've shaded it in and put those marks on top. That's already quite strange. We don't expect to see that. That's quite surreal. I'm going to try holding my pencil at the top, so I've got a bit less control, and I'm going to swiggle it. So we're making quite abstract lines and shapes. There we go. And what you could do is then work into these as well. So what happens if we work into them and add patterns? So we've got very loose shapes, and then we work into them with quite intricate patterns. What happens? How does it look? Okay. And I might swap to my other hand. I'm right-handed. I'm going to use my left hand. Just make some marks this way. I've done so many practices using my opposite hand. When I'm showing examples, I've actually got a bit more power with it. I've got more control than maybe I'd like for doing this, but that's one thing you can try. So just lots of different lines and marks, and then I'm going to come in with my paints and use these. So I'm going to work with my watercolours. And those of you that were here last term when we did water painting, you might want to incorporate a bit of that in, for example, if you're using paints. So water painting is where we put the water down first, or wet painting. So I'm going to colour inside one of the shapes, and then we just put bits of colour on top. So I'm keeping the water inside of one area, confining it to one area, and then I'm going to paint on top. And the colours will contain to that shape. They will be contained within there, but they will run and create a really nice marbled effect like this. And this is really nice on your picture. You could do a drawing. Again, if I was going to paint I could draw my elephant, I could fill it in with red and blue or red and green, any colours I like, which you wouldn't expect to see, like this, and create a marbled effect. I'm going to try some mark making using my colours. So just trying things out different ways. What happens if we overlap colours? They run into each other. Got parts of the mix. I'm going to do a bit of wet painting over here. And you don't have to repeat what I'm doing. It's up to you if you want to use some of these methods or just come up with your own. I would just try as much as you can. Maybe you've got longer than I do here, so really use it as a chance to experiment and see what you can create. And this is actually how the Surrealist artists used to work in the early 1900s to create their own artworks. They would start by doing this. They would start by experimenting in this way, by just sitting down with their materials and just seeing what they could create subconsciously when they were experimenting. And yeah, light areas you can go over and make them darker. If you're using oil pastels, you might want to put some oil pastels down and then go over them with your watercolours, and the watercolours will resist the oil from the pastels and become separate. You might want to try that. Yeah, like I say, just have a play and do whatever you'd like to do for that. So I'm colouring in some of these areas on my shape like this. I could try colouring them in different colours and shades. Again, I'm quite interested when I create work in contrast, so having a really loose, free area of a picture, like a very abstract picture of a person or a place that's really, really expressive, really free, and then working into it and make it really quite intricate inside of that. There we go. So there's my first experimental piece. You could do as many of these as you like. I advise, if you're really enjoying it, you might want to do 3 or 4. Just enjoy it. Just do a few. So with my paper here, I've got a larger sheet here I'm going to use. Just work on A4, that's absolutely fine. I've got some A3 paper at home, so I'm just using this, but it's, yeah, absolutely fine. Whatever you've got that you want to work with. Now what I'm going to do here for the next thing is just to work quite intuitively again and just create marks and lines and patterns that come into my head. So I'm not, again, looking for a fixed result. I'm just drawing. I'm being very free. See, this is quite therapeutic to do. I'm just allow the lines and the marks to take whatever direction your hand wants them to go in. So let your hand do the drawing. Don't try not to let your mind take over. There we go. And what I'm going to do is, so I've just got these squiggly lines here. Now, when I was quite young, I'd look at things. So I'd look at patterns on the floor, in the wood on the floor, or in curtains, or different areas around me, and I'd make out shapes. I think, oh, that looks like a little dog, or that looks like a person. So I want you to do that now. Maybe some of you still do that. Just look at the shapes you've got on your page and see what you can turn them into. So I'm looking here, and I can see that this actually, I can see the shape of the side of a person's face here. This is the nose and the mouth. So I'm going to fill that in. I'm going to give this person a nose. I've got a nose, I'm going to give them an eye. I could paint on a face. Mouth. And like I say, this should open up a whole host of new opportunities for you, of new ideas that you wouldn't have thought of doing otherwise. And I'm working quite quickly because of times. I know that you've probably got quite a lot you want to cover in the time that we have. So again, please feel free to take as long as you want and do as many pictures as you would like to do. Just to, it's a bit like a clown now. Use your imagination. Maybe I could try filling in everything I can see here with different faces or patterns. This could be a long, strange bird shape here. Let's give it a beak. Let's give it an eye. So remember, these are just our experiments, and we're going to take what we've done here and apply it to our next picture. I'm going to give it a tail like this. So I've got this long kind of half fish, half bird shape there. And just because of time, I'm going to move on and start my final piece. So you guys take as long as you want with that. If you want to spend, you know, like I say, do 2 or 3 of these, fill the whole sheet in, then that's fantastic. Just experiment. Okay, so I've got my sheet of paper. I think I'm going to work landscape, which is this way up. And from the shapes I've made on here, I've just been inspired quite quickly. I really like this long bird fish, this cross between a bird and a fish. So I'm just going to start with this. I'm going to keep all of these to hand, all of my experimental sheets for techniques and processes that I've liked, and I'm going to incorporate that into here. So, yeah, I'm going to work landscape so I can fit it in. So I want it to be really long. There we go. And I'm going to do a long, I'm just going to copy that, a long fish shape, which turns into a tail. You can change anything that you want or develop anything that you want. So I've got the shape of this strange fish here. I'm going to give it a beak like a bird. I'm going to give it quite a human eye, I think. Or maybe like a doll's eye, which is just staring without any eyelids on. There we go, that's quite surreal actually, that's quite creepy. I'm going to give it a wing here. So again, just working quite freely, quite spontaneously. And I've talked a lot about, like I say, things being in the wrong context, so being something that's supposed to be really big actually being really tiny now. So I could do something like a really small elephant underneath it. That would be quite strange, quite surreal. I could do the whole thing, or maybe just the head, or maybe a little house underneath. That would be quite surreal actually, or some flats. I'm going to do a really small building underneath, maybe like a block of flats. And you might want to do a few of these finished pieces. It might be that you really enjoy this, which I think you will do because it's very creative and expressive. You might come to the session with a few pictures and then go away today or at some point over the weekend if you've got time, and create more. So you've got a tiny little block of flat. I do a house. These are very simple drawings. So this is funny proportions. My house is bigger than my block of flats, but that is fine. I just want to give this impression of something. So I've got this strange fish. And now think about how I can incorporate some of these patterns and textures into my picture, some of these different techniques. So, for example, I know that I really enjoy doing my water painting, and I really like the effects I get from that. So with my wet painting, I could make my fish really wet. Like I say, those of you that were here last term, you'd have done the water painting session. If you've not, for wet painting, we just make whatever area we want wet. So I want to make some of my fish wet, the main part of my fish bird. I should say my fish bird wet, but nothing around it. So I'm just going to get that really wet. There we go. And when it's wet, I'm going to get my paint. You can do this also with acrylics, watercolours. Work really, really well, but it will work with acrylics or poster paints too. I advise them, if you've got watercolours, to use them because they really bleed out nicely. You see, in all the wet areas, the colour will disperse outwards, and it has a really lovely kind of marbled effect here. Remember, you can do anything that you want for this. So make up your own animals or creatures, your own scenes. And, you know, I could easily spend several hours doing one now, but just because of time and to give you time to do your own, I'm not going to do that. But if I had a bit longer, I'd love to create a background here. Where could this be? Maybe this has come from the initial example I made of telling you you could have a fish walking down the street. Maybe that's inspired this somewhere in my mind. In my subconscious, things tend to come to the front of our mind. So it's really a really good way of letting our imagination free and experimenting. And that's another thing as well, context. It could be, you know, the little picture I showed you earlier is just the little duck on the bike, and I've left the background white, so I just wanted the focus to be on that picture. You might have a really detailed artwork, but you just want to leave the background white, so our attention goes straight to the picture, the main picture on the page. We've got the negative space around it, or you might have a really detailed background with lots and lots going on. I might do, for the tail, I really like the shading, the very light shading and smudging with the darker areas. So I could start shading that in. Smudging. And then using my pencil line to do some dark lines over the top like this. And yeah, again, filling up the page. So like I say, you could leave it as it is, or you might fill out a whole pattern, a whole background, a whole place. Where would this look really out of context? Really out of context. What are you drawing? Where could you put it? So it could be a fish walking down the street. It could be tiny little pink elephant and a giant mouse, or a humongous ant, or something tiny like that. It's just about really letting your imagination go and just experimenting with the materials you have and learning what we can create, what works well together. Put a bit of colour on here. Or just in the time we've got, you might just spend the whole time doing experiments like this. And then you'll show this when we have our Zoom class at 12, and I can advise on where you could take it afterwards. That's absolutely fine. So the more experimentation, the better, I would say. And please do have a look at Salvador Dali's artwork. Also, there's an artist called Max Ernst, so that's Maxernst. And I think you'll be inspired by some of his works as well. So just have a look. We're all going to have our own unique styles we'll put on this. All of our work will look different, but just look at the way he uses surrealism and uses images together, and I think it will really inspire you. So thank you so much for joining me today, guys, and I will see you later. I can't wait to see what you've produced. See you soon.